I've seen countless patients in my time as a nurse, but none have shaken me to the core like Mr. Thompson. He was brought into the emergency room one stormy night, unconscious and pale as a ghost. His skin was ashen, and his veins appeared dark and lifeless. It was as if every drop of blood had been drained from his body. As the medical team rushed him into the trauma room, a chilling silence fell over the usually bustling ER. The atmosphere was heavy with dread, and I could feel the fear emanating from my fellow nurses and doctors. Something about Mr. Thompson's condition was profoundly unsettling. The doctors worked frantically to stabilize him, but despite their efforts, his vitals continued to decline. I stood at the foot of his bed, observing the eerie scene before me. The machines beeped ominously, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Hours passed, but Mr. Thompson's condition remained unchanged. It was as if his life force was slipping away, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. The medical team was at a loss, and a sense of hopelessness began to settle in. As the night wore on, a feeling of dread washed over me whenever I stepped into Mr. Thompson's room. His lifeless eyes stared blankly into the distance, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer truly present in his own body. In the early hours of the morning, a sudden commotion erupted in the ER. The lights flickered, and the machines beeped erratically. Nurses and doctors rushed to Mr. Thompson's bedside, but it was too late. His heart had stopped beating, and he was pronounced dead. An autopsy was ordered to determine the cause of death, but even that yielded no answers. Mr. Thompson's body was unlike anything the medical examiner had seen before. His veins were dry and shriveled, devoid of any trace of blood. It was as if his circulatory system had been entirely drained. As news of Mr. Thompson's bizarre death spread through the hospital, an air of unease settled over us all. Whispers of supernatural forces and curses circulated among the staff, and many refused to enter the room where Mr. Thompson had passed away. The hospital chaplain tried to comfort us, assuring us that there must be a logical explanation for his condition. But deep down, we knew that this was something beyond the realm of science. Night after night, I found myself drawn to Mr. Thompson's empty room. I couldn't escape the feeling that his spirit lingered there, trapped between life and death. The air was heavy with a presence that I couldn't explain, and a cold chill ran down my spine each time I crossed the threshold. One night, unable to resist the pull any longer, I ventured into the room alone. The lights flickered as I stood by the empty bed, trying to make sense of what had happened to Mr. Thompson. The silence was deafening, and the darkness seemed to close in around me. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the hum of the machines. It sounded like a plea, a desperate cry for help from beyond the grave. My heart raced as I strained to listen, but the words were unintelligible, lost in the void. Fear gnawed at my insides, but I couldn't tear myself away. It was as if Mr. Thompson's spirit was reaching out to me, trying to communicate something of utmost importance. I felt a compulsion to understand, to help him find peace. Over the next few days, the hospital became plagued by a series of unexplained events. Lights flickered, equipment malfunctioned, and a sense of foreboding hung in the air. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures darting through the hallways, disappearing when approached. As I delved deeper into Mr. Thompson's medical history, I uncovered a dark secret that sent shivers down my spine. He had been a recluse, rarely leaving his home, and rumors circulated that he had dabbled in occult practices. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that something sinister had taken hold of Mr. Thompson, something that had latched onto him in the shadows of his secluded life. But what could I do to break the hold of this malevolent force? One night, unable to resist the compulsion any longer, I returned to Mr. Thompson's room armed with a makeshift Ouija board. It was a desperate attempt to communicate with whatever entity had taken him, to understand its intentions. As I placed my hands on the planchette, a cold wind swept through the room, and the temperature dropped drastically. The board seemed to come alive beneath my fingertips, moving erratically, spelling out cryptic messages. Release me, the board spelled, and I knew then that I was not dealing with Mr. Thompson's spirit but with something far darker. The entity was using his body as a vessel, trapped in a state of torment and seeking a way to break free. Fear gripped me, but I refused to let it overpower me. With trembling hands, I repeated a cleansing prayer I had found in my research, pleading with whatever malevolent force had taken hold of Mr. Thompson to release its grip. The planchette moved with an almost violent force, spelling out a final message: "Your soul is mine." My heart pounded in my chest as I felt an overwhelming malevolence surrounding me. I sensed that the entity was not just in the room but was all around, watching, waiting. Summoning all the strength I could muster, I recited the prayer louder and more fervently. The lights flickered violently, and an otherworldly scream echoed through the room. It felt as if time itself stood still, and then, as suddenly as it had started, the tumultuous energy dissipated. I was alone once more, and the room felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. The malevolent force had departed, and I knew that whatever had taken Mr. Thompson had finally found peace. Since that night, I've tried to move on from the harrowing experience, but the memory of the empty vessel haunts me still. I can't help but wonder if there are other forces beyond our understanding, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to take hold. And I pray that I never encounter such malevolence again. I've always been drawn to the eerie and mysterious, so when I landed a job as a hospital janitor, I couldn't resist exploring the dark corners of the old building. Little did I know that the hospital's washroom on the 3rd floor held a chilling secret that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a stormy night when I first encountered the unsettling presence in the washroom. The flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows on the walls as I cleaned the mirrors and mopped the floor. I had heard rumors from my fellow janitors about strange occurrences in this particular washroom, but I didn't pay them much attention. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced into the mirror, I saw something strange out of the corner of my eye. It was a fleeting glimpse, a shadowy figure standing behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. Brushing off the unease, I continued with my tasks. But as the night wore on, the presence grew stronger. It was as if an unseen force was drawing me toward the mirror. I couldn't resist the compulsion to investigate. Stepping closer to the reflective surface, my breath fogged the glass, revealing an unsettling message etched into the mist. "Turn back," it seemed to say, but curiosity got the better of me. I reached out to touch the mirror, and a jolt of cold energy surged through my fingertips, sending a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the washroom into complete darkness. Panic welled up inside me, and I fumbled for my flashlight. As the beam of light cut through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to face the reflection. There, in the mirror, stood a figure so grotesque and nightmarish that I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. Its eyes were hollow sockets, and its elongated limbs seemed to stretch into the abyss. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight in terror, and the lights flickered back on. I found myself alone in the washroom, but the lingering sense of malevolence made me uneasy. I hurriedly finished my shift, telling myself it was just a trick of my tired mind, but deep down, I knew there was something more to the washroom's eerie aura. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn back to the washroom. It was as if an invisible thread connected me to the unsettling presence. I found myself visiting the washroom even when I didn't need to use it, almost as if I were under some sinister spell. Each time I entered the washroom, the malevolence grew stronger. The mirrors seemed to hold a sinister secret, reflecting twisted images that filled my mind with dread. I began avoiding eye contact with my reflection, fearing what I might see staring back at me. One night, unable to resist the pull any longer, I stood before the mirror and dared to meet my own gaze. But what I saw sent chills down my spine. The reflection I expected was distorted, and my face contorted into a sinister grin that I had not formed. In horror, I stumbled backward, but the image in the mirror did not change. It seemed to taunt me, mocking my fear. The mirror had become a portal to some dark and malevolent dimension, and I had unwittingly invited its presence into my life. As the days passed, I became more obsessed with the mirror. I researched its history and discovered that it had once belonged to an old woman who died under mysterious circumstances. Legend had it that she had been involved in dark occult practices, and her malevolent spirit had become trapped within the mirror. I knew I had to break free from the mirror's grasp, but it was like an addiction, pulling me back time and time again. I tried to confide in my colleagues, but they dismissed my stories as the ramblings of an overactive imagination. One night, unable to resist the call any longer, I returned to the washroom. But this time, I brought with me a small vial of holy water and a crucifix. I stood before the mirror, steeling myself against the terror that lurked within. As I sprinkled the holy water on the mirror's surface, a deafening scream echoed through the washroom. The lights flickered violently, and the mirror seemed to shatter into 1,000 pieces. I felt a surge of energy wash over me, and when I opened my eyes, the malevolent presence was gone. Relief washed over me as I realized that I had finally broken free from the mirror's grasp. But the experience had left its mark on me, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something dark still lingered in the shadows. Years have passed since that fateful night, and I've tried to move on with my life, but the memory of the malevolent mirror haunts me. I avoid mirrors whenever possible, fearing what might stare back at me. And in the darkest corners of my mind, I can't help but wonder if the malevolent presence still lurks, waiting to reclaim its hold over me once again. I've been working at St. Mary's Hospital for over a decade, and I've seen my fair share of spooky occurrences, but nothing compares to what happened last winter. I still shudder at the memory, and I feel compelled to share this terrifying tale. It all started innocently enough when I was assigned to work the night shift on Ward 13. I'd heard rumors about the ward being haunted, but I never believed in such nonsense. The ward was tucked away in a dimly lit corner of the hospital, and its eerie atmosphere was enough to make anyone uneasy. On my first night, I was introduced to the night staff, including Nurse Jenny, who had been working on Ward 13 for years. She warned me about the strange occurrences that took place after midnight. People claimed to hear footsteps echoing through the empty hallways, even though no one was there. Others spoke of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their vision, disappearing when they turned to look. I laughed it off, dismissing it as mere superstition. That was, until the clock struck midnight and the hospital seemed to come alive with an unsettling energy. As I made my rounds, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the following nights, things took a more sinister turn. Patients in Ward 13 began experiencing unexplained deteriorations in their health. It was as if some malevolent force was draining the life out of them. One patient in particular, Mr. Jenkins, was admitted with a broken leg. He had been making steady progress until he was transferred to Ward 13. Within days, his condition worsened inexplicably, and he passed away in his sleep. I couldn't help but feel responsible, as if I had failed him. But as the days passed, more patients met similar fates, and a sense of dread loomed over the entire ward. During one particularly eerie night, I heard the faint sound of music coming from an empty patient room. The tune was hauntingly beautiful, but it sent chills down my spine. The melody echoed through the hallways, and I followed it, trying to locate its source. It led me to an old dusty record player tucked away in a storage closet. I switched it off, hoping that was the end of it, but the strange occurrences only intensified. One night, I caught a glimpse of a pale figure standing at the end of a dark hallway. It was hard to make out any features, but its eyes glowed with an eerie intensity. I approached cautiously, but the figure vanished before my eyes. Doubt and fear consumed me as I tried to make sense of the events. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being tormented by something beyond comprehension. My sleep became restless, filled with vivid nightmares and the sensation of being watched. I confided in Nurse Jenny, hoping she could provide some reassurance or explanation. She told me about a dark history surrounding Ward 13. Decades ago, the hospital used to have an experimental wing where unethical experiments were conducted on patients. Many lives were lost, and the pain and suffering endured during those times left a residual energy that lingered in the ward. As the days wore on, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being drawn towards something malevolent. I found myself compelled to explore the abandoned sections of the hospital, including the long-forgotten experimental wing. In those shadowy halls, I encountered a presence so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. The air seemed thick with sorrow and anguish. It was as if the ghosts of the past were reaching out to me, urging me to uncover the truth. As I delved deeper into the history of Ward 13, I discovered records of a doctor who had been involved in the sinister experiments. Dr. Richard Blackwood, his name sent shivers down my spine. He was rumored to have been driven to madness, obsessed with unlocking the secrets of life and death. The haunting escalated, and I knew I had to put an end to it. With the help of Nurse Jenny, we conducted a ritual to try and cleanse the ward of its malevolent energy. We burned sage, chanted incantations, and attempted to communicate with any lingering spirits. But the atmosphere only grew more oppressive, and I feared that whatever we had stirred was beyond our control. In a final desperate attempt, I sought out an old priest who had dealt with paranormal cases in the past. Together, we performed a powerful exorcism, calling upon the divine to banish whatever malevolence lurked within Ward 13. As we concluded the ritual, a chilling wind swept through the ward, and an otherworldly scream pierced the air. It felt like the very fabric of reality was being torn asunder. And then, as suddenly as it began, it all stopped. Ward 13 fell silent. The unsettling energy that had plagued the hospital for so long seemed to have finally dissipated. The patient's health began to improve, and the shadows that once haunted the corners of our vision were gone. I resigned from St. Mary's Hospital shortly after that, unable to erase the traumatic experience from my mind. Even now, years later, the memories of those chilling nights linger, a constant reminder that some things are best left undisturbed. The horrors of Ward 13 will forever be etched into my soul, a reminder that darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places.